Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. It has been a dramatic week in the ongoing fight between South Africa's largest iron ore miner and its largest steelmaker. Joining me today is Engineering News editor Terence Creamer, who has been monitoring developments. Terence, welcome to Second Take. Can you take us through some of the latest developments in the ongoing fight between Kumba Iron Ore and ArcelorMittal, and also just remind us how it arose in the first place?
Yes, you must remember that this was once ISCOR, a nationalised industry, and it was privatised at some point. But in 2001, ISCOR, the steelmaker, was in a lot of trouble. And there was a view that, it should really just become a mining company and close down the steel assets. But government intervened at that point, and there was a process to save the steel industry and to form, through the unbundling process, mining entities and a steel entity. The steel entity, to make it attractive, they said had to be vertically integrated back into the iron ore resources at Sishen. And that was done through a commercial arrangement where, ISCOR got undivided share of the Sishen mine. And there was a supply agreement that they would get 6.25 million tonnes a year of that ore for its South African operations, in order to stay a competitive industry. But there was a rider to that. You get that through the commercial arrangement, and then government would negotiate a developmental steel price with the new owner. And the new owner was an international, at that stage, L&M, which morphed into ArcelorMittal, and now it's ArcelorMittal South Africa. So they had this competitively priced iron ore, and that was part of the process and part of the developmental outcome. But the other very important element was to provide competitively priced steel. And government made many attempts to get a deal in that regard, but it failed. So there's been an adversarial relationship really between government and ArcelorMittal ever since. They have changed their pricing formula away from import parity pricing to a basket model where they take four domestic selling prices in 4 countries, and then they adjust it to the rand-dollar exchange rate, and they do that on a monthly basis. But there's never really been happiness around that, and it hasn't really deviated markedly from import parity price. So you can see there's a long history. But in 2001, we basically had the split between what was then ISCOR and became ISCOR, and then became ArcelorMittal South Africa, and Kumba, and also Exxaro emerged from that. So very big entities have emerged from this one single company, and a lot of value has been released for shareholders. But as I say, not really for the South African national interest, other than the tax that these companies pay, but we didn't really get the steel price benefit. So there is a long history to this. But during the process, Mittal indicated they wanted to expand at some point, and they wanted to get access to more iron ore, and felt they had a right to participate in Sishen South. That led to an arbitration process for many years, and in the end the arbitrator ruled, sorry, you actually only have access to the Sishen mine, not to associated minerals, and therefore you cannot participate in the Sishen South project. That was a big shock to Mittal at the time, and but they didn't think that the actual right to the Sishen mine was under threat. But I think during that process, Kumba then started to look at, they were always unhappy with this cost plus 3% arrangement, and they started to look at ways to get out of it. And in February this year, they basically told ArcelorMittal South Africa, look, you failed to convert your mineral rights by the 2009 deadline, April 2009 deadline. Therefore, your rights have lapsed. Therefore, the supply agreement has lapsed. Therefore, we need to move to a commercial arrangement. This immediately triggered an arbitration process, which has been quite adversarial as well. They haven't really come to terms. And really it escalated and escalated and escalated till last Friday, where in frustration, Kumba said, you haven't come through with your arbitrate, you haven't come through with an interim pricing agreement. We are now going to start charging you $50 a tonne plus for Saldanha steel material, and $80 a tonne for inland material, which immediately, ArcelorMittal responded and said, well, we can't afford that, and we're going to have to start moving to close down certain capacity, including Saldanha steel. And Saldanha steel, you must remember, was the reason why this unbundling process actually happened, because there were so many financial problems around Saldanha steel that ISCOR was in such trouble that government had to intervene, the IDC had to intervene, there was a bailout process, and then there was the eventual unbundling. So it is very core to the history of this whole process. So basically it came to a head on Friday last week, where it was going to potentially lead to job losses, although, people are not happy with the way ArcelorMittal, threw out that threat of job losses, almost in a cry wolf type way. And I think maybe lost quite a lot of credibility in the process, because by the middle of this week, they agreed to an interim pricing agreement that wasn't very different from what was offered last Friday. And now suddenly Saldanha Steel is no longer on the chopping block. So that's really the latest development. That's where we're at.
What is likely to happen next, and when do you think will we have finality?
Well, I think the big shift in emphasis has been the fact that government has been able to intervene over the last week. In fact, because the companies allowed it to escalate to the point it did, government was always looking for a way to intervene, and that gave them the opportunity. And I think there could be some downside risks for both Kumba and ArcelorMittal as a result, because government's intervention is basically now premised on two principles. One, we need to go back to the spirit of the 2001 unbundling agreement. The unbundling agreement wasn't just about creating these new mining companies, which it did as well, but it was also about securing a competitive steel industry. That was one, and it did do that. The second element it never did was to secure well-priced steel for downstream industry. And now they're seeing this as an opportunity to get back involved and to get those principles reinserted into the outcomes. So that's going to be interesting to now watch, because we're going to still have the arbitration process, which Kumba yesterday said could take 2 years to unravel. And we've also got the second political process, which potentially has quite a lot of power to influence the outcome. And it's going to be interesting now to see whether that corporate process wins the day, or whether this political process actually influences the outcome.
Terence, who do you think will be the losers and who will be the winners from these processes?
Well, the immediate loser is ArcelorMittal South Africa. It seems more and more they're coming to accept that they've lost their mineral rights at Sishen. Look, they will say, look, we're still contesting that. We're still contesting the suppliers contract. We're still contesting whether we ever had to convert our rights. You see, their argument is that they had a right to an already converted right that was converted by the Sishen Iron Ore Company on their behalf. But the fact that the Department of Mineral Resources didn't see it like that, and nor did Kumba. In fact, Kumba applied for those rights. So did a company called Imperial Crown Trading, which eventually was granted prospecting rights very controversially at Sishen. Meant that I think Arcelor's coming to terms with maybe the fact that they have lost those rights, and therefore they agreed to this interim supply agreement, which is very much, from my perspective, putting the cart before the horse, because unless you have certainty on the rights, and who owns them, how can you be signing commercial agreements? In fact, does Kumba own those rights? And what is going to happen to these windfalls that Kumba is going to be earning? Because, in fact, what's happened is the rights theoretically have reverted back to the state as custodian. They've awarded ICT a prospecting permit, which is controversial in itself and is being contested. Kumba is contesting it both at the DMR review level as well as at the courts. So we haven't really got certainty as to who owns those rights. So therefore, how can Kumba demand a different pricing arrangement over assets and out of stuff that they're mining, potentially really mining on behalf of the new owner, the government? Could the government then come back to them and say, look, those windfall rents that you've earned in the interim that will last until July next year actually should revert back to the state? So there's a bit of a risk, a downside risk that suddenly has entered. It was only really upside for Kumba. They were really doing brilliantly. They're making, in anyone's language, super profits. Now, to secure commercial terms for this local domestic iron ore could really take it to even another level. So I think that now, with the government intervention and the principles being established by government, and they're saying we're wanting to discuss, we don't feel that this process is over. We feel there's a lot of unfinished business here. It's not just a commercial dispute anymore. This is there's national interest at play. So there's a whole new dynamic which has imposed some downside risks, not just for ArcelorMittal, but now I feel also for Kumba. and potentially for ICT if they get the rights, because there's definitely talk now in government to use all the instruments that are available to them to ensure that those two principles that I spoke about, competitive steel production, low-cost steel supply, are firmly established. Now, the way to do it is to possibly influence it right upstream. So to say, either impose an export tax on all iron ore, that would be very dramatic stuff, and I'm sure the iron ore industry will fight it tooth and nail. Or otherwise say specifically for that 6.25 million tonnes, there must be certain rules about cost plus type mining arrangements so that we do continue to produce steel competitively. Everyone in the steel industry will tell you it's going to be very difficult to be competitive if you aren't backward integrated into your resource. And I think, we know ArcelorMittal is a loser, but Kumba is not necessarily a clear winner, nor is ICT, even though I've got my doubts that they will be able to hold on to those rights.
Terence, thank you very much. That is the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.